Today, we're talking about Ruth. And I love it because this lady Ruth, she was a lady just like us. Just another person that wanted to see an extraordinary God work in her life. So if you got your takeaway card or your app, pull it out. Because today where we're going, talking about Ruth, I think you can take something out of this that is going to help you this week coming up. And I promise you, if you ask God for the chance, He'll put somebody in your path who needs to hear this. Because let me connect this with football for a minute. Okay, any football fans in here? I see that Cowboys hand in the back. He's tentative. Okay, so real quick, if you don't know football, a couple years ago, in one of the Super Bowls, Seattle was playing New England, and it came down to basically the last play of the game. Seattle, all they had to do was run it in the end zone to win the Super Bowl, and for some reason, their coach went like haywire. He decided to throw it, and it got intercepted on the goal line. This guy named Malcolm Butler, who before that play, virtually nobody outside of New England had ever heard of him. But after that, everybody's like, Malcolm Butler, this guy who intercepted it and won a Super Bowl for New England. They were talking to him after the game, talking to him the weeks later, and they're like, man, why is your nickname Scrap? People said to this guy, Malcolm Butler, that he played with a chip on his shoulder because he felt like he had been saved off the scrap heap. That New England had looked out there and said, hey, undrafted, unsigned, let's pick him up off the scrap heap. I want you to understand, this lady Ruth, you're like, man, how does Ruth connect with Malcolm Butler? They both felt like they got pulled off the scrap heap. I don't know if you ever feel like you're in the scrap heap, and you're like, man, could anybody ever pull me out of that? Could anybody ever, the term today is redeem me from that? Could anybody ever see something in me and pull me out of that scrap heap and make something out of my life? Maybe you are there. The danger is if you are in great shape and the money's good and the job's good and the relationships are good and you're saying, nah, I'm not in the scrap heap. I don't need any redeeming. You are in a more dangerous place than Ruth was. Because Ruth, she felt like she was in the scrap heap and she needed somebody to reach out and redeem her. Like literally walk up to the scrap heap and say, hey, I'll take that one. I will redeem that one and make something beautiful out of that one. Ruth knew she needed that. I want to make sure if you're not on a scrap heap today and you're in great shape and you're cruising and you just got invited to church, you're like, hey, I'm just coming just to appease my friend or my boyfriend, my girlfriend, my friend's friend. I don't need this. You need it even more than Ruth does because Satan is trying to trick you into thinking you're not on a scrap heap, then you don't need any redeeming. Yes, you do need redemption. So we're going today, this book in the Bible named after the main character, Ruth. It's 4 chapters, and I want to encourage you, if you have not read it before, read it this week. I'll unpack pieces of it, but part of what I want to do as a pastor is be a catalyst in your walk so that you will take this and you can't wait to read the full story of Ruth. And you ask God what He has for you in it. Honestly, you take me out of the way. I'm a conduit today, but there's times too where God, He wants to speak directly to you. So, if you got your takeaway card or your app, I'm going to do a little differently today. I'm going to tell you my 5 points that we're going to find in there, and then we're going to kind of mine through Ruth and pull these out. Because in Ruth's story, the 5 things I see is number 1, kindness. And you're like, oh, kindness, that's nice. Now, these first 3, if you will embody them and literally walk with God with kindness, with integrity, and with faithfulness, if you will walk with those kind of characteristics in your life, you could see God work in a way that is unbelievable, unstoppable. The last 2 terms are a little bit trickier. The one, number 4, is sovereignty. And you're like, sovereignty, man, what kind of church term is that? Simply, that means God's in control. And you're like, well, I know that's not true. If you know my week, I said, just walk with me then. Just trust me in this. This term sovereignty we'll see throughout this story. And then the last beautiful word is redemption. Redemption, like literally, you feel like you're on a scrap heap and life has kind of kicked you around, or you kicked yourself around, or you made some mistakes, or you're not that smart, or you're not that beautiful, or you're not that rich. You say, well, how could God ever use me? God says, actually, first of all, I don't see you as scrap. But if you see yourself as scrap, I will pull you off that scrap heap and redeem you for a life that is abundant. Now, the story, I'm going to kind of tell some of it and read a little bit of it, and then you're going to get to hear from one of our visionaries, a lady in our church who God actually brought this message to me through her. I was talking to her earlier summer, and I had 1 slot open left in the summer, And I was praying, God, which woman in the Bible you want us to talk about? And through talking to her that day, she said, man, I love the story of Ruth. It's kind of, it means so much to me. I said, okay. Well, then that's where we're going, because this will be my last part of Story Makers. Mitch will talk next week about Timothy to wrap up the series. But today, as we talk about Ruth, her story, it actually starts with Naomi. This lady Naomi, who lived in Bethlehem with her husband Elimelech. And you don't hear a lot of kids named that these days. We'll call him E. Her husband E. And so they lived in Bethlehem, and they're married, go through a famine, and basically they had to leave, or they chose to leave, to go to the land of Moab. So they moved to Moab, and Naomi, life is going fine. She's married. They have 2 boys. Over a period of time, these boys, they get married. I mean, life looks perfect. And then you read things in the Bible, and it seems like, oh, that happened. No, it's tragedy when Naomi's husband dies. Certainly the heart pain, but also the situational issues of, hey, where's income coming from? Is she safe now? Is she going to have to go, rely on her family? If she can't rely on her family, how will she make it? So she loses her husband over the next 10 years. Son number 1 dies. He had been married to Orpah. And son number 2 dies. He'd been married to Ruth. So that's where Ruth comes in the story. So where we're sitting now is in Moab. Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth. And they've all been through tragedy. So I don't know if you can relate to pain, to going through trials, to going through seasons that are so hard, and you say, God, are you really in control? And God says, I haven't changed. Your circumstances have changed, but I have not changed. So in Ruth chapter 1, when Naomi, she says these ladies, said, hey, you ladies just stay here. I'm moving back to my hometown, but you stay here and start life over. Get married, take care of yourself. I'll go back knowing I'm old. I mean, you talk about scrap heap. She felt like she's on a scrap heap. Naomi's like, I'm old. Who's going to marry me? I can't have any more kids. My life is basically worthless now. She's crushed. She says to Orpah and Ruth, go your way. At least make something out of your lives. And the ladies are like, no, we're going to stay with you. And Naomi says, no, really, I mean it. I release you. You can go. And Orpah does go. But we pick up here in Ruth 1, we see the kindness of Ruth. And throughout this, if you want to jot verses on there next to some of those words or notes, but when you talk about having characteristics of godliness, of literally the king leading your life, kindness is a big piece of it. And we see in Ruth chapter 1, it says, Naomi had just spoken to them, said, really, go. At this, they wept aloud again. And then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth, she clung to her. Look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law, she's going back to her people and her gods. Go with her. I mean, in this moment, Ruth has the choice, the freedom to go, but instead kindness overflows. She says, no, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I'm going to go. Where you stay, I stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. So what we see here is this characteristic in Ruth of kindness. Now, it's interesting. I've read this story a bunch over the years, and until I read it multiple times this week, it never occurred to me the negative words of Naomi in chapter 1. Now, I want you to lock in on this, because in our next series where we're going with something called Farm-Raised Faith, there is so much power in our words. Like literally, when something's in our heart or our head, it's got some power. When it comes out in our words, we are literally like speaking truth into action. Remember we were talking about speaking God's word, speaking truth? There's also a flip side to this. Because in chapter 1, I count this, Naomi, she speaks negatively 6 times. Now I want to tell you, if you are looking to see God work in your life in a positive way, it's not going to work through speaking negatively. In chapter 1, she says stuff like, am I going to have any more sons? I'm too old. The Lord's hand has gone against me. The Almighty has made my life bitter. The Lord has brought me back empty. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. And if we're being honest today, sometimes we talk like that. And God is saying, look, I've got hands full of blessing for you, and what you're doing effectively is you're putting my hands back here, and I can't bless you. Your negativity is canceling what I have for you. God, though, in his amazing grace and love, keeps Ruth in Naomi's life to push back against that. And that's where you see this concept of the sovereignty of God, literally the control of God. God is in control. Look at this in Ruth chapter 1. It says, Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. And you're like, okay, that's interesting, not very powerful. No, you understand. Timing. As you go through the rest of this story and see what Ruth does to go out and glean, she goes out after the harvesters to collect the extras so they can eat. That couldn't have happened 6 months before that. That couldn't have happened 3 months before that. God in his sovereignty allows Naomi and Ruth to get back to that town at just the right time, to where their needs can be met in a way where people say, hey, how are you getting fed? You don't have any food, you don't have any money? And they said, somehow God's providing because of his timing. And I want to challenge you to be looking for God's sovereignty. Because the more you look for it, the more you realize things aren't just chance. You didn't get lucky. It didn't just happen. That God, when you trust in his control and his sovereignty, you will experience more of his control and his sovereignty. That continues in Ruth 2, verse 3. Says, she, Ruth, went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. Look at this phrase. As it turned out. Say, as it turned out.
As it turned out.
I mean, how many times in our life we say, oh yeah, it just happened to work that way. Or, man, I got lucky. This thing came together. No. As it turned out is a picture of God's sovereignty. She could have gone to any field. She could have ended up in anybody's place. She ended up, as it turned out, by God's sovereignty, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz. Okay, say Boaz.
Boaz.
Come on, with some sass. Boaz. Man, I need more people naming their kids Boaz. Meg, if we had a fourth, we're going with Boaz. I love that. My next dog is going to be Boaz, something like that. So this guy Boaz, he's out there. He's got his field. He's got his crew. They're working. And you say, man, that sure is like lucky that she ended up at a good field, a good crew. Possibly, or possibly, as it turned out, God got her there. Because it turns out Boaz, actually, there's some relation. There's some connection there. This term that starts unveiling, this term kinsman redeemer or guardian redeemer, which we really don't know about in our days, what it meant in that day is that when you went through a season, a tough, rough, damaging season, you would look to somebody else literally on the family tree that could come and help you. And this was Boaz. Imagine, how lucky that is that she ended up in his field. No. God's sovereignty got them there at the right time, got her to where she needed to be to have an opportunity in front of her. But the thing with opportunity is you have to also have the character to flourish in the opportunity. She had the kindness, so she was in the right spot. We also see throughout this story, like I said, the integrity and the faithfulness. But think about this. When you think about God's sovereignty, Romans 8:28, maybe you heard this verse before. It said, I don't really understand that, believe that. Romans 8:28, it says, and we know that in all things, so say all things.
All things.
Okay, how many things?
All things.
This is easy to say sitting in church on Sunday. It's hard to say, like when Melissa gets up here later and tells her story, it's hard to say in all things, God works not just for good, but for the good of those who love him. Remember last week we talked about your heart being fully committed, and when it's fully committed, God's going to strengthen you. So don't get this wrong when your friend's going through stuff, say, hey, God works for good and everything. Not if their heart isn't committed to him.
That's right.
And I'm not being mean, but I am being narrow because Jesus literally said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. I'm the one way of the Father. So what Romans 8 is saying is, if your heart is on track with God, God can use anything that happens to you for good. And he will use those things for good. If you've been called according to his purpose, it's a calling. And then I put on your takeaway card, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. It's talking about your path. It's talking about trusting God and he'll guide your path. I put Isaiah 55, that God sees things in higher ways. And when you hear Melissa's story, you say, wow, I didn't see things that way, like God was seeing it. Or I didn't imagine God was still marching her down a certain path when she was saying, God, which way do I go? How do I come through this? All these verses tie into the concept of sovereignty. So say, God is in control.
God is in control.
Okay, that's sovereignty. That God is sovereign. Like he reigns over everything. He is in control even when it feels like he's not in control. Well, The other thing we see about Ruth is her integrity. And I love this word integrity. I think at times people get kind of like jammed up on what it means. But to me, integrity is simply, it's doing the right thing even when no one's looking. You could overcomplicate it, but the bottom line is you're doing what's right even when no one else sees it, no one else notices it, no one else knows, and you're like, well, hey, what's right? Because there's so many different rights in this society. Here at Vision Church, where we put on our armor of God, the first piece is the belt of truth. We say the truth is God's word. So that is what's right. So in times of saying, well, what's integrity? It's doing what God says to do even when no one's looking, even when it's hard, even when no one cares, even under pressure. That is godly integrity. You want the blessings of God in your life. You want to be redeemed beyond the scrap heap. You live with integrity. It says in Ruth 2:7 that Boaz had asked his workers, said, hey, who's the lady out there? What's she doing? The worker says, she said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters. She came into the field, has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. You know what this is? This is work ethic. Yes. I love that. That's a great way to honor God. You're not lazy. You're not slack. You're not, okay, I'm going to do the minimum I can do, or when the boss isn't watching, I'm not working. No, you have integrity. You work hard. That's what Ruth did. And when you have that type of integrity, you're literally setting God up to do amazing things. What also is cool in the story is we see the integrity of Boaz. This guy who, again, you got to read the whole story to get all the pieces. But Boaz is this man who's in the story, and we see this integrity, and eventually the way it's going to play out is beautiful. It says in Ruth 2:11 and 12, Boaz, speaking to her, says, Boaz replied, I've been told all about what you've done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you've done. May you be richly rewarded. Okay, so say richly rewarded.
Richly rewarded.
Okay. If you remember last week, we talked Deuteronomy 28. We talked about abundant prosperity. And I said, okay, again, who wants to be prosperous in their life? Show me. Who wants to be prosperous? Who wants to be prosperous? Okay, what if there was no money involved? Who wants to be prosperous? Remember we said, I want prosperous relationships. I want prosperous health. I want prosperous thinking. I want prosperous where I'm not stressing. And literally what he's saying here is may the Lord repay you for what you have done, Ruth. You have been a woman of integrity. You've been a woman of kindness to Naomi. Boaz notices this. He says, may you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you've come to take refuge. Can you visualize that? When you're facing your storms and it's beating down on you, and you're saying, I can't handle this, and God says, I can. And you literally get underneath his wings, his covering, the sovereignty of God. He says, I'm in control. I've got you. Boaz says, look, God's got you. And you go down to Ruth 2:23. I love this again. I see the faithfulness. We've talked about her integrity. We talked about her kindness. This faithfulness, it says, so Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvest were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law. Don't miss this. She has not even gone back to this town, and now she's looking for a guy, and she's moving on. She is staying with her mother-in-law. That faithfulness, God honors that. So I want to challenge you, especially if you've got someone in your life that is tough to be faithful to. And you're praying for them, and you're trying to love them through it, and God is saying, be faithful. I'm watching. I will richly reward you for your integrity that is fleshed out in faithfulness. I love that. Now, Ruth chapter 3, and this is like reality TV. This is so cool. She's like talking to her mom, her mother-in-law, Naomi, and she's like, okay, what should I do? Naomi says, go after that guy Boaz. He is a kinsman redeemer. He's probably, pretty studly, hunky looking. He works out in the field a bunch. He seems like he's in good shape. He's got these crews. She says, go after him. He can be your kinsman redeemer. So basically she goes in there and in an honoring way, she goes up and waits on him at night, waits by his feet, and he wakes up. He's like, whoa, what's going on? And she says, hey, I'm here because I'm believing that you can be my kinsman redeemer, literally the one who will redeem me and help me in this situation. And in this situation, in Ruth 3:9, he sees her, says, who are you? I'm your servant Ruth, she said. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are my guardian redeemer or my kinsman redeemer. She lays it out and says, Would you consider doing that? Would you show me kindness? Would you, in your integrity, take me in? We see more of the integrity of Ruth because Boaz has seen it. Verse 11, look what he says there. He says, and now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of what?
Noble character.
No, say, of what?
Noble character.
I love when I come across people in our town and they say, hey, I know so-and-so. I know Courtney. She goes to your church, right? I said, yeah. And their words basically say, she's a woman of noble character. They might not use those exact words, but the way they describe you or you, and what I'm hearing is they see your character of nobility, which literally is Christ-likeness in you, and Boaz has seen this in her work ethic, in her faithfulness to her mother-in-law, in the way she treats people. He says, wow, I see your integrity. And for you ladies, if you want to grow in nobility in your character, spend time in Proverbs 31. This week, if you don't know where to read, you get in Proverbs 31 and you read that. And literally you say, God, make me a woman like this. Do this in me, God. Your power in me can give me noble character that you will bless so I can be blessed to be a blessing. That's who Ruth was. Well, throughout this, we see the faithfulness of Boaz. He says, okay, I'm gonna do the best I can for you. And he does the right things. And I promise you this, if you're trying to get God to bless you, do things the right way in the right order. He doesn't do an end around to try to redeem her. He goes to the guys at the gate, and in those days, the way you did is you bring out some of the elders, you bring the guy who actually was the closest kinsman redeemer. You say, hey man, do you want to redeem this situation here? And he's like, yeah. He said, well, if you're going to do that, you're also going to take on this and this and this. He says, nah, I don't want all that. He says, okay then, I will do it. I've taken the correct process. I will redeem Ruth, and by association, Naomi. You see the integrity of Boaz. Well, this story, it leads us to modern day with my friend Melissa. Because I've been talking to Melissa about the life of Ruth. You know, the ups and downs, the need to be cared for, loved, redeemed in tough times. So I want to hear this firsthand from her. She's got some great things to share with you today. So Melissa, if you would come on up here, and if you guys would make some noise for Melissa Kepler. All right. Well, Melissa, thank you for coming to spend a couple minutes with us. You can grab a seat right there. And I want to start off with a picture of you and your boys. I know y'all just had a cool little vacay you went on, right? So tell us who's in the picture with you.
Okay. So the glasses right there is Alex. He's 10. And then Austin is 15 in the blue. And that's Jack in the front. He's 9.
Okay.
They're
Love
so
these
cute.
boys. They are so cute. Yes, we love them. So, Melissa, why don't you tell us about some of the, I guess I'm calling them the dark times that you've been through. Tell us about that.
So in 2011, my life was pretty good. I was a wife and a mom, and I stayed home with those boys, and I was just kind of living the fairy tale that I wanted. And then 3 weeks before Christmas, we got a phone call that Austin had a brain tumor, and it was a stage 3 cancer, and it was devastating. It shook us to our very core. It changed the way we looked at everything.
And how old was he at that time?
He was 8.
So 8-year-old
He was
cancer.
8, and
Okay.
I can very vividly still, 7 years later, see picking him up at school that day because he got out early to go to the doctor. And he comes down the hallway smiling at me, and all I can think is he has no idea what lies ahead of him. And it broke my heart. But we went on through that, and then 2 years later, my marriage ended. And so this whole little fairy tale that I had just crushed, and the whole world fell on top of me again. And I felt like I was starting over, and I felt very alone and sad.
So tell us, I appreciate the honesty you shared with me when you said you're going through this. How did you respond in those times, and then how are you responding now?
When Austin first got sick, I was sad and I was scared, but the overwhelming emotion was anger. I was furious. I was so mad that God had allowed this to happen to him. I felt betrayed. I felt forsaken. I felt like he had just turned his back on us. And through those 2 years of him being in treatment, I didn't turn my back on him. I prayed and I read my devotional, but I did it because that's what I was supposed to do. I didn't do it because I believed that he was going to do anything for me. I didn't think he was good anymore, and I was just angry. Now, when things happen, I go to him in prayer, and I say, I don't understand this, and I don't know why this is happening, but I know you do, and I know you're in control, and I've seen you work, and I know you're going to make everything better for me.
Why does the story of Ruth matter to you?
Ruth didn't know God at the very beginning. They came from a land that didn't worship him, and he took her and changed everything for her. He redeemed her. She didn't know anything about him, and she just went on and did what she was supposed to do. And he eventually makes her the many, many, many times grandmother of Jesus Christ. I mean, he completely changed her life.
Mm-hmm. Let's pull up the picture from, I guess you call it your war room.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So that is a little space in my closet that I just needed a place where I could go and not be bothered, where somebody wasn't screaming mom and knocking at the door when I was trying to pray. So I put a note on my closet door, and I said, guys, if I'm in here and the door's shut, you just need to let me be. I'm praying, and I'm having a long time with God. And I go in there, and it's funny to think that this little space in my closet is now like my favorite place in my house, because I go in there and I cry, and I praise him, and I just talk to him and have a real relationship with him, not just a prayer, thank you for this and please, but really pray and get into what he's doing and what he can do and trusting him.
Has anybody seen the War Room movie? I encourage you, if you have not, we got the slide for that. So you can grab it on Netflix or Amazon or something like that. And it's simply a story about the power of God and how he works through prayer. And that's part of where this concept comes from, of carving out a spot in your house and making it your, like I talked a couple weeks ago about your altar, where you spend time with God personally. And I guess, Melissa, just wanted to ask you, what would you recommend for somebody that maybe is having a hard time gripping with the fact, is there God's sovereignty? Is he still in control? They're mad at him. What would you speak into them?
He is in control. He can see the whole picture, and we can only see this little moment that might be crushing us, but he sees everything, and he knows that he's going to work that to our good, and that's something that I forgot to believe back then, but I believe it completely now. Find a space where you can just be alone with him. And I go in there and I get lost, and I will think, well, I'm going to go in and spend 20 minutes, and I'll come out and spend an hour, and I just get lost talking to him, and that is a game changer for me, to have that real, authentic relationship with him.
Well, guys, I want to encourage you to take something away from this that can help you in your dark times. Or, like I said, you come across someone this week who's struggling, and they say, man, how could God possibly be in control? And you remember Melissa's story, or you remember Ruth's story. So if you guys would, why don't you thank Melissa for sharing. You did great. You did great. So the final piece of this story is this redemption piece. And it's so cool that the way this works out is that Boaz, he acts as a man of integrity, and he does redeem Ruth. And they end up married. And you're like, oh, that's a neat ending. No, what Melissa said is so true, that their son, Obed, was the father of Jesse. You're like, Jesse, man, I heard that somewhere. Jesse is the father of King David. You're like, wow, man, they led into royal lineage. Even more than that, that led into the lineage of the Messiah. This all came through Ruth and Boaz, as they both walked with integrity and faithfulness and kindness and trusted the sovereignty of God. So I want you to understand this about redemption. Whether you feel like you're on a scrap heap or whether you feel like everything's great, sin has infiltrated all of us to where we need a kinsman redeemer, a guardian redeemer who would look at you and say, I'm looking past all your mess, all your goodness, all your success, and I will pick you and I will redeem you if you let me. That's what redemption is about. And if you're new to church and you never even thought about the need for being redeemed, I want God to press down on your heart. Say that somebody's the king of your heart. Either you or Jesus Christ. And this guy, Jesus, who came through this lineage of David, who came through this lineage of Boaz, can be and wants to be the king of your heart, so that every day you can say, you're good. You might say, man, today sure stinks. Oh, the circumstances today are awful, but God, you're still good. You're still good. You can say, you have never, ever let me down. And you're sitting there saying, yes, he has. Matt, if you knew my story, if you knew about my son getting cancer, if you knew about the divorce, no. God was still with you. God is still walking with you. He is still your Redeemer. Even when life is letting you down, that King will never let you down.